My name is Mike Weaver. I'm an Identity and Access Management Specialist with Consensus Technologies. I'm going to be presenting today on the Novell Identity Manager Connector for Google applications. This product is sold and branded by Novell, now NetIQ, but it's manufactured by my company. And I wanted to just give y'all an overview on what its technology is, what its capabilities are, how you might use it, as well as show you how it looks when you've deployed it. So we're going to go over an overview, do some features, give you some tips on implementations, do a demo, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what's coming up. Just a few tidbits on what we've got in the pipeline for this connector. Some of you may also know that Consensus sells a Google Apps connector for Identity Manager independent of the Novell product. For Identity Manager 401, it's the same feature set. In terms of the core code, they're identical. So the Novell one on your license agreement versus the Consensus one purchased directly from us. 6.1 has those the other in terms of your functionality. With the Novell branded driver, you get the Novell base support system. With ours, you come to us. All right, so get into an overview. This module does a unidirectional synchronization of users, groups, and containers into Google Apps. Unhappily, the Google API set does not yet expose an interface for us to do publisher channel, that is to say inbound material back to the directory. So we can't, at this time, react to users, adds, moves, changes, password changes, things of that nature that are done within the Google Apps system. But all that good stuff can come up from your directory, from your Identity Vault, back into Google, should you so desire. It's written entirely in native Java code. We're not using a web services component. We're using the published Java API sets of Google. There's several of their APIs that we're using in this product. And this particular module that I'm talking about is intended for and only supported with Novell's Identity Manager 401 and later. Some of the features that this product offers include synchronization, or you might call it provisioning of users, groups, shared contacts. These are contacts that are global to the entire mail domain, and containers, OUs. We're also supporting moves between OUs within the same mail domain, secondary mail domains within that primary mail domain, support for alias domains such as students.educationalinstitution.edu if it's not a true secondary but rather an alias, as well as setting those send as features on that user's account so that their from looks like it came from that alias domain. We support roles-based entitlements as well as roles-based provisioning modules. The one I'm showing you in this demo is going to be the roles-based provisioning module, so it works very well with the 401 paradigm of user application, role service mapper, all that good stuff. We do support the 401 account tracking features. We provide one-way unidirectional password sync, regardless of your password policies in terms of matching Google's policies. One of the challenges faced by people is Google has a certain policy on their passwords in terms of length and complexity. But if you pre-hash your passwords, which we can do with this connector, then you can send passwords that may be incompliant with Google's policy but are compliant with your own local policy, as well as synchronizing user profile information. Things like contact, email address, or well, obviously email address, but phone number and physical address and things of that nature. So to break it out for you, we provide near real-time synchronization. As soon as the event is seen by the Identity Manager connector, we send it up to Google. With users, we support create, update, and rename, password sync, contact info, email settings, including the send as, language, signatures, labels, forwarding, and so forth. And we can do this in an entitlement-based approach if you wish to implement an entitlement system. With groups, create and update, set Google permissions, and we support those through a basic limited right now to just group membership. You can entitle users to be members of Google groups. A full suite of group entitlement features is going to be in the next release. Contacts, these are shared contacts. They're implemented out of the box as custom object classes in your directory, although you can modify your connector to work with any eDirectory object that has the correct information on it. You can model that off of the schema that we ship with the product, as well as organizational units. A primary use of organizational units is to control features within Google Apps. You can have containers that allow email but not to share documents or the sites. You can have another one that allows people to do Google Docs but don't get an email box, and so forth. You can mirror your own organizational structure, or you can use entitlement-based placement and thus control what container users get into without having to mirror that structure in your local site. And I'll show you that. One of the questions that we get is, how does this connector compare with the Google-supplied directory synchronization tool, or GADS? And this table sort of breaks down the main points between those two products. The GADS is a free product that's offered by Google when you have one of their domains. It does not synchronize passwords. That's a big one for a lot of our customers, and that simply has to do with the fact that it's an LDAP reader. It reads into your directory and then sends the information up to Google. Real-time synchronization, it does a polling cycle. You can set a cron job or some other batch process file to handle that if you need. It does handle all the basic users' information and to some extent groups, but it is somewhat limited in terms of group placement. Runs on most of your Windows and a Linux platform. The driver that we ship works with all supported IDM platforms. You can also implement considerable business rules, including querying back into Google to make decisions on your business rules. Like if the user's already in a certain group, don't add them into this other group, and things of that nature. It is offering full 24/7 support, and multi-domain and advanced email settings are supported as well. If you want to implement this, it does require that you have a Google Apps for Business or a Google Apps for Education level account or service with Google. The free one that you can get for small business or for testing does not support API access, which is required for this product. You do need to enable your API access function, and I'll show you where that is. And you need to have network access to Google servers. It's a little funny to say it, but there's been a number of places that we've tried to do the implementations of this where this is actually a pretty big problem. You need, whatever device is running the driver needs to be able to talk unfettered to Google's site over ADM 443. You can do this either using a remote loader, which is a remote driver technology, perhaps on a machine in a DMZ or something like that. The IDM engine server itself can do it. One thing I want to point out is right now web proxies are not being supported by the driver. You need to have direct access to Google servers without passing through some sort of an authenticated proxy or a web filtering device. When you go to implement it, the driver shim modules are not installed in your eDirectory libraries by the Identity Manager installer. You'll need to install them yourself. I'll show you where there's an additional spot on the ISO, where the additional drivers are stored. You need to extend the schema using the Novell Google schema SCH file that is provided with it. And you do want to make sure that you use Designer 4 and have it go to Novell's website and update the packages. There was a number of bug fixes that have been done since the initial release. The driver version that was bundled with Designer 4 has a few bugs in it. If you go out and just have it do a package update, you'll be updating the bugs to the fixes that we've pushed out. There's also a driver module patch that you're going to want to get off of Novell's site. I believe it's 401 IR1 that also fixes a few bugs that were available in shipping. One question that I get asked a lot is single sign-on via SAML technology to Google Apps versus password sync. A lot of enterprises don't want to send their passwords into the cloud, as it were, for whatever reason. And I understand that. It's a reasonable position. Google does enable you to use SAML Federation, which is in a way, a passwordless login system from Google's perspective. To do this, you don't need to synchronize your passwords up there. You do have to have some sort of a local identity server, identity provider that can speak SAML, such as Novell's Access Manager. And I have to say, of a lot of these that I've implemented, that Google Apps is one of the better SAML implementations I've ever used. It properly supports client-initiated or service provider-initiated federation, so the user can hit Google first, get redirected to your login page on your local site, bounce back with the SAML authentication token, and the user gets in. Big drawback: if you're using only SAML, you cannot support mobile devices easily. POP and IMAP are not easily supported, and the Google Apps Synchronizer for Outlook is not easy to support. Those products all require a password to log into Google. They can't do SAML federation. So if you're wanting to support these things, iPads, iPhones, Droid, tablets, and phones, so forth and so on, Thunderbird mail clients, you need to synchronize a password up there. It doesn't have to be your primary password, but they do need to have a password in Google that they know. You can actually do both if that fits your environment, but it is a little more complicated for your end users. All right, let's break out of the slideshow and take a look at a few things. Let's see, somewhere around here, let's see if we have any QAs. Nope. Okay. This is our Google Apps domain that we use internally for testing, consensustest.com. I have running in a virtual machine here a SLES 11 box running Identity Manager 401 Advanced Edition, running on my laptop right here. And it's currently running the Google Apps driver, which is the shipping version. When you're wanting to do this, I mentioned this before, but you do want to check for package updates and make sure you're getting them. If you don't have the most current packages, you're going to run into all sorts of issues with this driver. Does anybody have any questions? I'm really moving fast and I don't want to leave anybody in the dust. Yes, no? Okay. So right here, assuming my sessions haven't timed out, is our test tree environment. I've got a couple of containers up here, field and island, which I'm going to leverage with some material on this server. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were using entitlements-based provisioning on this one, so we need to use user app to design roles and resources to assign to our users to grant them Google Apps access. Now, of course, in your environment, you'll have a real Google Apps, or I mean a Identity Manager administrator, not the default UA admin account. Working in the RBPM environment of 401, entitlements are provided to users through something called the resource catalog. We've got a couple of resources already created, such as the field GA account. This grants the entitlement to Google Apps just for the account. If we take a look in the driver, we can see that there's a number of entitlements that come with it. User replacement, Google Apps account, and group membership. The account entitlement is used to provision a new account for a user or to enable a suspended account for a user. Let's create a new resource. We'll call this a consensus test account. And it will grant the consensus test GA account. Now we need to specify the entitlement. Click to browse. This is our Google Apps driver. We'll notice that we've got 3 accounts down here, or 3 entitlements. I'm going to specify the account creation entitlement. As with many entitlements, this driver has a multi-valued or a specific entitlement value that you can assign. When it comes to the account entitlement value, what that's referring to is the domain name, the email domain name that you want it created in. This particular Google Apps account has a primary domain, a consensus test, but it also has a secondary domain associated with it, idmtest.org. So when I assign this account entitlement, I can choose to assign a particular entitlement value to it now, either the consensus-test.com main domain or the idmtest.org secondary domain. The driver knows about these through the use of global config values. Under Google config, this is the primary domain, the parent domain, and then this is where you list your secondary. If you need to add another one, you just click the plus to add it there. Now, of course, it needs to exist in Google. So there's our consensus test account. We need to assign that to a role. And typing properly helps as well. So we'll create a new role. We'll add this resource to it. Now we've got a role that we could assign to a user that will create them in this domain. But we need to tell it where to put them. When I imported this driver, I chose to use entitlement-based placement, which means that where they go in that domain, in the root or in one of the OUs, is dependent upon a placement entitlement. Right there. So we need a resource for that as well. I've already got one here for the island container. Places users in the island container in Google Apps. We assign the entitlement value now with the value of island. It actually does go out to Google and queries all of the existing containers that are in your Google Apps environment and gives you a pick list that you can choose from. So we've already got this entitlement in place. So we'll assign that to our role. Let's see, what was the name of that? One of the challenges you run across when you make these things up on the fly. So this will create a user in Google Apps and place them in the island container. If you want to move a user, then all you have to do is assign them a different placement entitlement. You do want to make sure that they don't have two at the same time. When the driver sees that old placement being removed and the new placement added, it will initiate a container move. Create our user. Give them a super secret password. I'm going to go up here and assign that user to this role. There are other ways to do this, but that's a little beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. There's our guy, test user, test boy 3. When you assign roles, by the way, you can choose a date at which they become effective and a date at which they are removed, if you wish, an expiration date. By the way, if you remove the Google Apps account entitlement, according to the driver setting, it will either disable the user, do nothing to the user, or delete the user. Use caution with the delete, because once it's gone, it's gone. You have to call Google to get their mailbox back. Okay, so he's assigned. That should have given him the entitlement, so he should be up in Google, and we can see he is here now. One oddity that you may notice is there's two testboy 2 users. What I did here was created the user and assigned him one role, field minion, which created him in the idmtest.org domain and put him in the field container. I removed him from that role and added him to the island minion, which had an entitlement for the consensus-test.com domain. So his account in IDM test was suspended and his account in consensus test was created in the correct container. The reason for that is subdomains or secondary domains are separate email spaces with separate namespaces. The user can have an account in both. So you can assign this account entitlement multiple times to put users in multiple domains. Any questions about this so far?
It doesn't appear that there's any questions at this moment, but just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to put them through in the Q&A and the chat, and we'll be sure to get to those.
Absolutely. If you wanted to do group memberships, you use another resource. And when you select the group membership resource, it queries in to Google and gives you all of the existing Google groups. You can add these more than once. You can have one entitlement grant membership in the multiple Google groups. These groups don't have to exist in your local directory if you don't want to. And we'll assign that resource to our test role. And our user is now a member of that group. We remove that entitlement, that user is removed from the group. Let's take a look at some of the configuration parameters. And the way I'd like to approach that is through adding an additional driver. If you have multiple primary domains, you need to run multiple drivers anyway. But if you have just a primary with some secondary domains, like we have in our demo here, then you can run just one driver. So I'm going to drag over the Google Apps driver from the palette. The available packages is the Google Apps base. If you're not seeing version 1.0.1 or later, you still need to update your packages. The shipping version was 1.0.0, These are all the sub-packages. These are the ones that were not updated in the last package, and these are the ones that were, just to verify that you have the right version. It informs us that it's going to add in some common packages from the normal Identity Manager install. Wants to know the name. The driver name does need to be unique. Now, this is the domain name of the primary domain of your site, not the secondary or an alias. It's the primary domain name. This administrative ID needs to be an account in your environment, such as this one, which is a full administrator. You also, when you create that account, need to log it in using the web interface at least once to validate the CAPTCHA that Google provides. Otherwise, the driver will not be able to log in as that user. The formatting for this is the admin username and then the domain. And then you use set password. To store the password for that account in the driver. You'll need to update it in the driver if you ever change it on Google Apps. If you're using a remote loader, you put the configuration here. We're not in this case. Account tracking realm. This is for the account reporting feature of Identity Manager for compliance and reporting. The realm name helps you separate various systems. The name is dependent upon your implementation. Okay, this is asking us for our primary domain again. Now, this question refers to how you want to control how users are placed within Google Apps. Your options are to not do any placement, meaning that they drop into the root container, so to speak. Mirrored placement, you duplicate the structure of your eDirectory tree from the user container down. Or entitlement based, which is what I showed you a little bit ago. There's also other options. If you want to customize your driver, you can write your own placement rules as you see fit. This is for account tracking and managed system tracking. It's not relevant to the actual function of the driver. Same is true with these. These are part of Identity Manager. All right, now, the Google initial password setting. Your choice is to either set the initial password to a random password or attribute value from a user, but this only applies if the eDirectory user that you're synchronizing does not have a password. If you have a universal password policy effective on those users and they have a password, it will use that instead as their initial password. But if you do not, you can choose to have it randomize a password or fill it in from an attribute. If you choose an attribute, you'll need to select what attribute you want it to use. If you choose random, you can choose how many alphabetic characters to use and how many numeric characters. So this would create a 12-character long random password. Again, this is only for new users and users that don't currently have an eDirectory password, a universal password. Use entitlements to control the Google Apps accounts. That account create entitlement that I showed you earlier under the resources, this controls whether or not that entitlement is what's used to create accounts. A more traditional driver might use a create rule that tests for attribute values to be present or a group membership. If that's what we would like to implement in your environment, you can turn this off. Match users who do not have a Google account entitlement. Basically, this is asking you if you want to throw away an add event, a new user object in the Google Apps driver before it gets to the matching rule. The matching rule will compare their username with the usernames in Google and try to find one that already matches. If it does match, it'll associate them and begin to synchronize them. This might be helpful if you have possibly conflicting users in your space and you don't want them to go match. You only want the Google Apps driver to do anything with them only when they have the entitlement. Otherwise, you might want them to go ahead and match even if they don't have the entitlement so that you can start managing their password changes. And also to have it react to entitlement adds and revokes to suspend or unsuspend the account. Speaking of which, from here you can decide what happens when the entitlement is removed from a user. You can have it delete the account. This is irreversible without calling Google support. So you might want to think twice about setting this, but if that's what your environment requires, then go for it. You can suspend or disable the account, or you can simply do nothing. Of course, you can customize the rules in the driver to provide additional options if you wish. My recommendation is typically to use disable. Also, do you want to use the group membership entitlement, which I showed you earlier? If you don't, you can still synchronize groups and then use the standard eDirectory group membership attribute to synchronize groups. Now let me show you. We'll pop over here. When you're doing the driver installation, the driver import that I just showed you in Designer is only part of the process. On the ISO that you shipped with the IDM 401, there's this additional drivers folder. Inside this additional drivers folder is, and this is the Linux ISO, so it's in an RPM format, is the Google Apps modules. This includes all the Java modules necessary to run this application. If they're not installed by default, you'll need to install this yourself after Identity Manager has been installed. But do check on Novell's website under Patches. Actually, it's under Standard Identity Manager. 4.1. There is a patch that you're going to want for this driver if you haven't gotten it yet. So if you're really doing a new deployment right now, don't use these. Use these instead. These are the updates. In that vein, our deployment also requires that the schema be extended. There's an SCH file that is shipped with Identity Manager that will do this function for you. You can either import that into Designer and then use Designer to deploy those schema over to the tree, or you can import them directly into the tree. The schema files are in NDS schema on Linux. And the one you're interested in is the Novell Google schema. iManager could import that. You can use Designer or even Console 1 if you're so inclined. So those are the items that you'll need to have a successful deployment. In terms of your settings on Google, you will want to go over to the, let's see, it's under Setup, no, Support. Domain settings. Please bear with me. They change the location of this every time I log in the interest of improving services and support. There it is. You need to turn on the API access right here to allow the driver to connect to it. All right, folks, that was basically all I had to show with you. Oh, I did promise you some futures. So let's talk a little bit about the futures. Right now, you can only move users between containers within the same domain. One of the features that we're looking to get implemented reasonably soon, I don't have a timeline on it, but it's on the near-term future, is moving users between primary and secondary domains, between secondary domains, and between secondary and primary domains, all within the same primary domain. This includes moving their mail, because it is a separate mailbox. Supporting resource objects as synchronized material. Supporting Postini as a separate standalone driver. Postini provides archiving and spam and things like that. And we, in general, continue to add new features and functionality as users request it and as Google makes APIs available for it. As soon as, for instance, they offer us an API for synchronizing users back down from Google or getting passwords out or any of that good stuff, you better believe it'll show right up. That's something we desperately want to do.